Welcome to UBS Trending on the Go. I'm your host, Anthony Pastore. With all that's going on in Washington, it's hard to know what you should be paying attention to, specifically as an investor. There's lots of legislation and policy to always talk about and, of course, to digest. So to help us simplify the most pressing topics today, I'm joined by John Sitilides, principal at Trilogy Advisors. John, so nice to have you here on the program. And we do have a lot to get to today. And as I mentioned, lots of topics and questions from our audience. So let me start with this one, John, because I think this is one of the bigger questions that people are wondering about. You know, President Biden released the details of his $2 trillion infrastructure bill a number of weeks ago. And since that time, it's certainly been debated over by both parties. And in fact, just this past week, the president rejected the latest Republican counteroffer. So what can you tell us about the bill and maybe even give us some idea of what the sticking points are from both sides?
Of course, Anthony, and thank you very much for having me on your program and letting me share some of these insights with your audience. The infrastructure bill is essentially deadlocked right now. What we had was an initial proposal from the White House earlier this year for about $2.3 trillion in infrastructure spending, an unprecedented level of proposed spending. There's been nothing like this in American history, but also because it's been a very all-encompassing infrastructure proposal with many questions about how one actually defines infrastructure in 2021. And so there are the traditional aspects of an infrastructure bill, which would involve construction and repair of bridges and roads and tunnels and highways, rail, transit, and the like, and also ports, harbors, and those types of water infrastructure facilities. But the Biden administration has also included some relatively new topics, billions and billions of dollars for electric vehicle subsidies, for electric vehicle charging stations, for electric buses. So there are several things at play here right now, Anthony. And one is simply on a policy level, what are we talking about when we're looking at federal infrastructure support? And there's a very pronounced divide right now, not only between the White House, but also between Democratic leaders on behalf of the White House that are negotiating with the Senate Republicans, and in the next several days with House Republicans in trying to put together a bill. So there's the larger issue as to what exactly constitutes infrastructure as proper federal spending. Then there's the cost. $2.3 trillion is an unprecedented amount for a single infrastructure bill. The Republicans responded initially with something on the order of between $550 and $600 billion. In recent negotiations between President Biden and the White House team and Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who is the senator from West Virginia, and she's been tasked by the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, to lead the negotiations on behalf of the Republican Senate. They're proposing something on the order of about $950 to $970 billion. And it seems, Anthony, in traditional Washington style, that much of this is about the red line of the word trillion. So Democrats want to go big, they want to go bold, and they want to spend more than $1 trillion on infrastructure, so it remains the largest such package ever in American history. And Republicans are concerned that it's a bit too much for what the federal budget is able to handle right now. And I think they would rather just stay below the $1 trillion level, so that semantically we're talking about 900 plus billion, but it's not $1 trillion. So you've got that issue. And lastly, I would say you've got the time frame. How quickly do you spend this kind of money? And what can the federal budget handle? And what can the national debt handle? Because it's going to be increasing in the years ahead, as it has been for the last 20 years. So the Democrats want to spend about $1.7 trillion over the next 5 years. That's a little over $300 billion a year. Republicans want to see, first of all, what the impact of the COVID pandemic is, especially on commuter transit, because you need high occupancy to make mass transit cost effective. If with telework now, as a result of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns across the country, many people decide not to return to the office on a 5-day-a-week basis, we don't want to see a situation where we're funding all of these green vehicles and they're largely empty because people are staying at home. So you Republicans also want to make sure that we're spending what they believe is affordable. And right now, if we're looking at just under $1 trillion, to be spent over 8 years, you're looking at about $95 to $100 billion a year. So policy and content, the time frame, and the overall cost, those are the major sticking points right now between the White House and the Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Right. John, it's interesting. Well, you're right. I mean, there are so many components of the bill. And as you mentioned, something as simple as trying to figure out, are people going to be going back to work? And do we need to have
Mhm.
all the subsidies for commuters, et cetera, and the transportation, et cetera? So, interestingly, the White House just said this week that it sees multiple paths forward here to getting this legislation passed. What do
Mhm.
you think the prospects of the bill getting passed in the House and the Senate are? And, I mean, that could be whatever form both parties might agree on. What do you think the prospects are of it happening?
Well, we just spent a few minutes, Anthony, going over the legislative process. What is involved here in drafting bills that can win a majority of votes in the Senate and in the House. But now we also have legislative procedures to go through in terms of parliamentarian rules. It's a little bit arcane, Anthony, but if I can just try to keep this, as you said in your introduction, as simplified as possible for your audience. There's, first of all, the desire, especially on the part of the White House and what I would call more of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, to ram through this very large, very ambitious infrastructure project by having all 50 Democratic senators vote for it. And remember, the Senate is deadlocked. It's 50-50. And so they need all 50 Democratic senators to stay on board and then bring in the vice president to be the tie-breaking vote. And even in the House, you have the slimmest majority in many, many years, giving Nancy Pelosi the speakership. So she can't afford to lose many of the centrist Democrats that are somewhat concerned about whether or not the ideas are right for this time and also whether or not the cost is right for this time. So they're working on very thin margins in the Senate and the House. And so one idea is to have what they call budget reconciliation, Anthony. You usually use this for a special situation. It's related to the budget and to making numbers work. And there are very arcane Senate rules as to what's allowed for a 51 vote majority, right? So if you have all 50 Democrats plus the vice president, you pass it through reconciliation. But we just had a ruling by the Senate parliamentarian just days ago stating that the Senate gets one shot at reconciliation during one legislative calendar year. So if they use that for just infrastructure and there are other bills that are difficult in getting 50 votes, they won't be able to do this again. So there are many in the White House and around Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer who are warning that perhaps it's better to roll in an infrastructure bill along with the president's 1.8 billion or trillion families plan, other spending, and put one massive $6 trillion budget bill up for reconciliation in September that requires all 50 votes, and then Vice President Kamala Harris can be the tiebreaker. But as you can tell already just by my description, that's an enormously tall order. And you have two Democratic senators that want very much to promote bipartisan solutions to these very difficult issues in the Senate and in the House. And so Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona are frustrating many of their Democratic colleagues who would like to push through a very ambitious agenda because their fear is that they're running out of time now that it's 2021. In 2022, they may not have the kind of time and support right after an election to get their agenda passed. And then if in the 2022 elections, historically, the party out of power, out of the White House, tends to prevail in the House and the Senate, there's a possibility the House and the Senate, or both, go Republican in 2023 and 2024 and completely thwart any Biden domestic agenda.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just quickly mentioned the 2022 election. I feel like we are barely recovered from the presidential election, and now it's going to make the midterms a really interesting time, as you said,
Yeah.
John, because there is so much going on and on both sides of the House, and then you have those more centrist congressmen and women and senators in the middle. So it's interesting to see what happens. And this brings up another topic, which is President Biden's Green New Deal. And this has been another stumbling block for both Democrats and Republicans. And it looks like at this point that the bill may not advance in Congress at this point. So the question is, do you think that the tenets of the Green New Deal could possibly make an impact to any other climate change policies within the Biden administration? In other words, was it all a waste of time, or can we actually see some of these things become part of the fabric of what the Biden administration is talking about with the American people?
It's a great question, Anthony. And remember that not everything in Washington depends on congressional legislation. As a matter of fact, under the last two presidencies, really with Presidents Obama and Trump, we've seen so much more taking place and moving the country's policies forward through executive orders. because the Congress seems to be immobilized on so many fronts. So with the Green New Deal, and I think if you look back at recent comments by both Senator Bernie Sanders and by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who really have given birth to this concept of a Green New Deal and a very ambitious green agenda for Washington, there really isn't a standalone bill right now because the White House has incorporated so many aspects of the Green New Deal, not everything that was in an overly ambitious proposal that was introduced by the Congresswoman in 2019, but many key aspects of it where she's been very pleasantly surprised, not expecting this from a candidate that came across as more moderate during the 2020 presidential election. So she's been pleased with the proposal and with the ambition, but as we've just been discussing here, then you come into the realities and the grinding house realities of the congressional agenda and the procedures that we're working with here. So there's a very good chance that many of the more ambitious climate components in the original Biden proposal are not going to be included in any of the legislative versions. And look, in the House version, this is now going to be up for markup, for debate in the next several days. And most Republicans have already admitted, they've publicly declared that they're going to oppose this bill because it has too many things they find ideologically problematic with our current economic status. And we don't know what's going to be coming out of the Senate because they had one bill involving surface transportation, but we still have another committee working on rail and water infrastructure. So what you may have happen is if there's no climate provisions in the legislation that finally goes to the White House for the president's signature, you may have either standalone climate legislation, which will likely find a very, very difficult pathway, again, in a largely deadlocked Senate and a very slim Democratic majority in the House, because many centrist Democrats will run away from a Green New Deal agenda. So what you may have in the end is the Biden White House issuing executive order after executive order, effectively implementing many of the policy aspects of the Green New Deal, even if they can't approve any new expenditures, because that you have to go to Congress for.
Right, and it's certainly not uncommon for a sitting president to make sure that they're passing legislation, or not necessarily passing legislation, but putting forth, and signing these into some kind of a
Yes.
law, right? So, I mean, it's really interesting to see what Biden and his team are going to do going forward. John, any other legislation that's going on out there that you're keeping an eye on that you want to let our audience know about?
Well, most of the energy right now is obviously on this infrastructure bill, and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer hopes to have a bill done by the end of July before the Congress goes into the August recess. In the next several months, I think you'll see a lot more attention paid potentially to new legislation that deals with gun control, that deals with immigration reform, possibly health insurance reform to try to fix what Democrats feel might still be broken from Obamacare. I think you'll see laws introduced to increase the minimum wage on a federal level across the country. And so I think these will be some of the critical issues. And one more very important one from a political perspective here in Washington, it won't affect the economy very much, Anthony, but a federal election overhaul is a very, very contentious issue in Washington right now. So I think these 5 or 6 major bills are going to occupy our attention either in the months ahead or certainly come January 2022.
John, thank you so much. Yeah, and clearly with the election overhauls that are going on in the country, a lot of debate over that. I'm sure we'll be talking about that for quite some time. And as you said, there are executive orders that are potentially going to be signed by the president.
Yep.
So a lot that we could potentially be talking about with you in the coming weeks. So John, always nice to see you. Thanks for joining me. John Sitilides, principal at Trilogy Advisors. John, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Anytime, John. We'll see you soon. And UBS is on social media, everybody, so you can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where you're going to find much of the timely content from our best thinkers and the intellectual capital that can help you make more informed investment decisions. And as always, if you do have any questions about whatever we spoke about today or how it could impact your portfolio, please speak with your financial advisor. So thanks again for joining us, everybody. Don't forget to check out our other full episodes of UBS Trending, which can be found on demand on ubs.com/studios, our website, and of course on the UBS channel on YouTube. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day. Remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. Thanks, everybody.